Little boy stands up in dad's wedding. What he says about the bride forces police to step in. The church was quiet. Sunlight came through the tall glass windows, making everything inside glow. Everyone was standing. The music had started. The bride was walking down the aisle. And in that moment, an 8-year-old boy named Ethan stood next to his dad, holding the ring pillow in his small, shaking hands. His tuxedo looked perfect. His hair was neat. From the outside, he looked like the proud little ring bearer. But if you looked closer, you'd see his knuckles turning white from how tightly he held the pillow. And his lips pressed together, trying not to cry. He looked up at his dad, David, who was smiling from ear to ear. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. But Ethan's heart was pounding, not from joy, from fear. And then just, as the priest raised his voice and said, "If anyone has a reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now." Ethan did the unthinkable. He stepped forward and his little voice rang through the church. "Wait, please stop." Gasps filled the room. Heads turned. The bride froze. David looked down at his son in shock. The whole church went silent. Just minutes earlier, everything had seemed fine on the surface. The music had played. People had smiled. The pews were full of friends and family, whispering happily and turning to see the bride. David had been standing at the altar, adjusting his jacket, waiting for his soon-to-be wife with a nervous grin. Ethan stood beside him, dressed just like his dad in a tiny black suit. His dark curls were brushed neatly, but his face didn't match the excitement around him. He wasn't nervous about being in front of people. He wasn't worried about dropping the rings. He was scared. Deep down, he knew something was very wrong. He had tried to tell his dad before, more than once, but no one had really listened. He was just a kid. What did he know? He looked up at David now, who smiled down at him. "You doing okay, buddy?" David whispered, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan nodded, too afraid to say what he really felt, because the woman David was about to marry, Emily, wasn't who she pretended to be. Not at all. The music changed. The priest gave a nod. The doors at the back of the church opened, and Emily walked in slowly. Her white dress shimmered. Her makeup was perfect. Her eyes sparkled, and the guests sighed with admiration. She smiled at David as she walked toward him. Everyone saw a beautiful bride in love. Ethan only saw a liar. He remembered her late-night phone calls, the voice she used when his dad wasn't around, the way she ignored him, insulted him, hurt him with her words. He remembered the file on her laptop, the insurance papers, the photos with the man she said was just her planner, the voice message about after the wedding. And he remembered how, even after showing proof, his dad still didn't believe him. He had almost given up. But today, standing in that church, he knew he couldn't stay quiet anymore. If he said nothing, he might lose his dad forever. The priest spoke again. "If anyone here has a reason these two should not be married." Ethan's breath caught in his chest. This was the moment. Speak now or forever. Hold your peace. And he spoke. "Wait, please stop the wedding." Everyone turned to look at him. Emily's face changed, from smiling to frozen. David stared at Ethan, not understanding. "What is it?" his father asked, confused. Ethan swallowed. His voice shook, but he didn't back down. "You can't marry her," he said. "She's not who you think she is." A low murmur moved through the guests. Emily took a small step forward, still holding her fake smile. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "it's okay to feel nervous." "No," he shouted, his voice louder now. "She's lying. I saw her computer. She's talking to someone else. She doesn't love you. She's planning something." Emily's smile twitched. Her hands clenched at her sides. David stared at his son, not sure what to believe. The boy who never lied. The boy who looked terrified, but determined. The church went silent again. Ethan reached into his pocket with trembling hands and pulled out a folded paper. "This is the insurance paper," he said. "She only wants money. Please, Dad, just look." The paper slipped from his hand as he held it out. David took it. The priest stepped back, and all eyes stayed fixed on one small boy who found the courage to stop a wedding and maybe save a life. David held the paper in his hands, his eyes scanning the words. His smile slowly faded. Around him, the guests whispered louder now, some in disbelief, others in curiosity. Ethan stood frozen in place, chest rising and falling quickly. He had never felt so scared, and yet so sure of himself. Emily's voice cut through the air like a knife. "That's enough." She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "David, don't you see what this is? He's just a confused child. He's scared of change. This is normal." But David didn't answer right away. His eyes were still locked on the paper Ethan had handed him. Emily's voice softened, but there was an edge now, tight and forced. "Honey, it's a wedding day. Emotions run high. Maybe we should take a short break. Just a few minutes, to calm down." David finally looked up, not at Emily, at Ethan. His voice was low. "Is this true, buddy? Everything you said?" Ethan nodded, his small face pale. "Yes, Dad, I heard her. At night, she was talking on the phone with a man. She said once you're married, they'll move to phase 2. Something about insurance. And I saw pictures on her laptop, her and that man. They're not wedding planners. They're together." Emily's face turned red, and her jaw tightened. Her voice was sharp now. "That's enough, Ethan." But David raised a hand, stopping her. His voice, still calm, held weight. "I want to hear everything he has to say." Ethan took a breath. His hands trembled, but he kept going. "She's mean to me when you're not around. She says I'm a problem. She yells. One time she grabbed me when I spilled juice, and she said if I told you, I'd regret it." More gasps filled the church. People looked around, unsure what to do. David turned to Emily, his expression unreadable now. "Did you ever touch my son?" Emily blinked. "Of course not. I would never. David, he's making things up." But Ethan wasn't done. "She talks to a man named M. She was always texting him. I saw the name on her phone. She said, once the wedding is done, you'd never see it coming. She said, you were wrapped around her finger." The room went ice cold. David slowly folded the paper and slid it into his pocket. He looked at Emily again, now seeing something different. Something he hadn't allowed himself to see before. There was silence for a long moment. Then Emily broke it, loud and furious. "You little brat!" she snapped, her voice echoing across the church. "You've ruined everything!" The guests gasped again. Even the priest stepped back. David's expression changed. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization, pain, and betrayal. In one moment, he saw it all clearly. How blind he'd been. How happy he had felt. So happy he ignored every sign. Every change in Ethan, every small thing that felt a little off. He looked at his son, standing there with tears in his eyes but not running away. Ethan had tried to protect him. David turned to Emily. "You need to leave." "What?" she snapped. "You're ending this because of some made-up story by a jealous kid?" David shook his head slowly. "No, I'm ending this because my son doesn't lie. And even if I didn't believe everything he said, what you just did right here in front of everyone proved enough." Emily stepped back, her face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this." But David didn't answer. A woman from the second row stood and walked out. A man followed her. One by one, the guests started rising, whispering to each other as they left. The celebration was over. Emily let out a small laugh, bitter and hollow. Unbelievable. Then she turned, heels clicking. Again, as she stormed down the aisle and out of the church doors, Ethan watched her go. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired and sad. He hadn't wanted any of this. He just wanted his dad to be safe. David knelt down beside him and put both hands on his shoulders. "I'm so sorry, son," he whispered. "I should have listened. I should have seen." Ethan sniffed and looked down. "I didn't want to ruin your big day." David shook his head and pulled him into a hug. "You didn't ruin anything. You saved it. You saved me." Ethan finally allowed himself to cry. Not from fear, but from relief. Behind them, the church was nearly empty now. The flowers still hung. The cake still sat untouched. But in that moment, nothing about the wedding mattered anymore. All that mattered was a father and his son, standing together after everything had nearly fallen apart. The church was quiet now. Most of the guests had left. The once happy wedding decorations felt strange, like decorations for a party that had never really begun. David sat on the edge of the altar stage, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, tie slightly, loose hands clasped between his knees. Beside him, Ethan sat in silence. He had taken off the ring-bearer pillow and placed it on the ground. His small hands were resting in his lap. His eyes kept glancing sideways, unsure if his dad was mad, sad, or just lost. David had barely said anything since Emily stormed out. He just stared ahead, deep in thought. The paper Ethan had given him, Emily's insurance file, was still folded in his jacket pocket. He hadn't even looked at it again. He didn't need to. His son's voice was enough now. Finally, David spoke. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ethan looked down at his shoes, then whispered, "I did. A few times. But you didn't believe me." David winced. It was true. He had brushed it off. He thought Ethan was just struggling with change. He never once imagined it could be something this serious, something this dangerous. "I thought maybe you just needed more time," David said, "to accept her. I wanted to believe she cared. I was so focused on building a new future. I didn't realize I was putting you in danger." Ethan didn't say anything, at first. But then he whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you. You looked happy for the first time in a long time." Those words hit David hard. He turned to face his son, his eyes full of pain. "Ethan, listen to me. Your safety, your heart, your voice. All of that matters more to me than anything. I should have seen it. I should have asked more questions. I let my own feelings blind me." Ethan looked up at him, tears forming again. "I was scared, Dad. She told me if I said anything, I'd be sorry." David closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists. That someone had spoken to his son like that under his roof. The thought made him sick. Then Ethan added, "And it wasn't just how she treated me. I heard her one night. She was on the phone. She was talking about some plan. After the wedding, she said, and she kept mentioning the insurance. That's when I knew it wasn't just about being mean." David nodded slowly. "Tell me everything." Ethan took a breath, and for the next several minutes he recounted everything in detail. The night he overheard the phone call, the file on her laptop, the text from someone saved as M, the photos, the way she would act like a different person whenever David wasn't around. David listened quietly. He didn't interrupt once. With each sentence, his face changed. Not with anger, but with a kind of slow, painful realization that made him sit up straighter. He had brought this woman into their home, into his son's life, and she had fooled them both. But mostly, "You said you found a photo?" David asked gently. Ethan nodded and pulled a folded picture from his pocket. It was printed from Emily's laptop. It showed her and a man with a scar above his eye, smiling like they were on vacation. Not co-workers, not wedding planners. Something deeper. David took the photo and stared at it for a long time. "I don't know this man," he said softly. "She called him Mark, or just M," Ethan replied. "I think they were doing this together." David exhaled slowly. "So, it wasn't just about money? It was a scam, a plan, from the beginning?" Ethan gave a small nod. "I think so." David stood up and walked across the front of the church, staring at the stained glass windows. For the first time that day, he didn't feel confused anymore. He felt clear. Hurt, yes. Betrayed, absolutely. But the fog had lifted. "I'm calling the police," he said finally. Ethan looked up, startled. "Really?" David nodded. "If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, then this wasn't just about a wedding. This was a setup. She was planning something bigger. Maybe even something that could have gotten me killed." Ethan's heart pounded. David walked to his coat, took out his phone, and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? David's voice was steady. "My name is David Matthews. I believe I've been the target of an insurance scam. My wedding was called off today because my son revealed that my fiancée may have been planning something criminal. She fled the church. I have evidence." As David gave the operator their location and details, Ethan sat quietly, his legs swinging gently from the church stage. His small body still held tension, but for the first time in weeks, he felt something else too. He felt heard. When David hung up, he came back to Ethan, knelt down, and looked him in the eyes. "You did the right thing today," he said. "You were brave. You told the truth, even when it was hard. I'm proud of you, son." Ethan nodded, blinking back tears. And as the first police car pulled up outside the church, its blue lights reflecting off the stained glass, Ethan reached out and held his dad's hand tightly. No matter what happened next, they would face it together. The sun had already dipped behind the trees when the first police car pulled up to the church. David stood near the chapel doors as two officers approached. One introduced himself, Officer Grant, while the other began asking quiet questions about the woman Ethan had called Emily. Inside, Ethan sat on a bench, feet dangling, watching everything with wide, tired eyes. His small hands rested in his lap, still fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. David turned toward him. "Ethan, buddy, they need to hear what you told me. Are you okay to talk?" Ethan nodded, though his voice came out small. Yes. The officers brought them into one of the side rooms in the chapel. It was quieter there. A few wedding decorations still hung on the walls, streamers, balloons, leftover joy. Ethan told the story again, about the overheard phone calls, the insurance papers, the photos. The tone in his voice was calmer now. He didn't rush. He didn't stammer. It was like something inside him had settled. Now that someone was finally listening, the fear had changed into focus. Officer Grant asked gently, "How did you know how to find those files on her computer?" Ethan glanced at his dad. "She left her laptop open once. I saw her name on an insurance website. Later, I tried her password a few times. I guessed it was her birthday. It was." David closed his eyes briefly. The weight of it hit him again. How smart, and how alone his son had been in this. The officers nodded. "You were very brave to come forward. We'll look into all of it. If this woman's real name is different, and she has a partner, we might be dealing with something much bigger than just a wedding scam." They asked David to email the documents. He agreed. Then they left to file a report and begin a trace, on the number saved as M on Emily's phone. The church slowly emptied. David told the remaining few guests the wedding was off. Some tried to comfort him. Some just left, shaking their heads. Others hugged Ethan tightly without saying much. By nightfall, David and Ethan were home. The house was strangely quiet. All the wedding gifts were stacked in the corner of the living room, wrapped boxes with smiling bows. Now, they felt like leftovers from a party that no longer had meaning. Ethan sat on the couch, hugging a pillow. David brought him a cup of cocoa and sat beside him. They didn't talk for a few minutes. Then Ethan whispered, "Dad, what if she comes back?" David placed a hand on his shoulder. "She won't get near us. I'll make sure of that. I'm changing the locks. I'll install cameras. And the police are involved now." Ethan nodded but didn't look convinced. David looked around the room. Everything reminded him of her. Her coat still hung on the hook. Her favorite mug sat by the sink. He stood up. One by one, he started removing everything that belonged to her. He didn't do it in anger, just quietly, thoughtfully, like cleaning out a wound. Ethan watched. He didn't say anything, but when David picked up the wedding photo album they had started, he paused. Then, without opening it, he walked outside to the fire pit and set it gently on the wood. He struck a match. Ethan followed him outside, standing beside him in the cold air as the flames rose. "I never want to see her again," David said softly. "Me either," Ethan said. The two stood in silence. The fire crackled. Above them, the veered stars slowly began to appear. Later that night, Ethan went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He tossed and turned. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the fake smile, the way she looked at him when no one else was around. The sound of her whispering on the phone. He got up and walked down the hall. His dad's bedroom light was still on. David was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. His tie was gone. His face looked older than it had that morning. "Dad?" Ethan whispered. David looked up. "Can't sleep either." Ethan shook his head. David patted the bed. Ethan climbed up and curled beside him, just like he used to when he was 5. David looked down at him. "I almost married someone who could have hurt us, and I didn't see it. I feel ashamed." Ethan turned his face toward him. "But you listened when it mattered most." David blinked hard, then pulled Ethan close. "You saved me," he whispered, "and I'll never forget that. Ever." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt safe, not because Emily was gone, but because his dad saw him again, not just as a kid, but as someone worth trusting. That night, they both fell asleep in the same room, the fire from the backyard still glowing low in the dark, the wedding that never happened now behind them. But the story was far from over, because in the days to come, everything would get even more complicated. The next morning came slowly. Outside, the sky was pale, and everything felt still, like the house itself was holding its breath. David sat at the kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee untouched in front of him. His phone buzzed every few minutes, with texts from concerned friends or coworkers, but he ignored them all. Ethan came down the stairs in socks, rubbing his eyes. He looked like a normal 8-year-old again, but David knew that yesterday had changed something in his son. There was a kind of quiet strength in the way Ethan moved now, like a child who had stepped into fire and come out carrying truth. "You hungry?" David asked. Ethan nodded. "A little." They ate in silence, toast and eggs. Nothing fancy. But it was the first breakfast in weeks that felt real. No fake smiles, no pretending. Halfway through the meal, David's phone rang. Unknown number, he picked it up. "Mr. Matthews? This is Officer Grant." David stood immediately. "Yes, I'm here. We've confirmed some information from your son's testimony. The woman you knew as Emily, her real name is Elise Rena. She's been using different names for years. She has a criminal history under multiple aliases, small-scale fraud, fake identities. But this looks like her biggest scheme yet. David swallowed hard. So, it's all true? Yes, sir. And more than that, we traced the number saved as M in her phone. It belongs to a man named Martin Fields. He's been arrested twice before for online scams and identity theft. We believe they've been working together. David glanced at Ethan, who was watching him closely now. Did you catch him? David asked. Not yet, Officer Grant said. But we're close. We sent units to a motel registered under his name yesterday evening. He wasn't there, but we found items connected to a lease. 2 burner phones, a fake passport, and some documents. It looks like they were planning to flee the state after the wedding. David's throat tightened. And if Ethan hadn't spoken up? There was silence for a second. Then Officer Grant said, "We may be having a very different conversation right now." David hung up and sat slowly. Ethan tilted his head. Was that the police? David nodded. Yeah. They found out her real name. Elise. She's done this kind of thing before. You were right about everything. Ethan looked down at his plate. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just said, I knew it. Later that afternoon, Officer Grant visited the house. He asked to see Ethan again, this time to show him a lineup of photos. Ethan sat on the couch beside his dad, flipping through printouts. When he reached the 6th photo, he stopped. That's him, he said, pointing. That's the man from her computer. That's M. The officer nodded and collected the photos. Thank you, Ethan. That helps a lot. We're issuing a formal warrant for both of them. Elise Rana and Martin Fields. David asked. Is she still in town? She fled the wedding fast, the officer replied. But she didn't leave quietly. Her car was spotted leaving the area by a neighbor's home camera, heading west. We think she's on the move, but we're watching every highway and airport. We'll get her. After the officer left, David sat beside Ethan on the front porch. The sky had turned golden. Birds chirped softly in the distance. It felt like the world was trying to go back to normal. But for Ethan, normal would never be the same. She was going to hurt you, wasn't she? He asked suddenly. David didn't lie. Yes, he said. If what the police found is right, I think she was planning to. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually. Ethan stared at the grass, his small hands resting on his knees. I heard her say insurance on the phone, he said quietly. I didn't even know what it meant. I had to look it up. David turned toward him. You shouldn't have had to go through all this. Ethan looked at his dad. But I did. And I think I'd do it again. Because it saved you. David's eyes filled with tears again. He reached out and pulled Ethan into his arms. You didn't just save me, he whispered. You saved both of us. They sat that way for a while. Just father and son, alone on the porch, trying to make sense of everything. That night, David received another call from Officer Grant. We caught him, he said. Martin Fields. He tried to board a bus to State's over. Someone recognized him from a Bolo alert and called it in. He's in custody. David exhaled. What about Elise? Still no sign. But we think she's alone now. He cracked during questioning. He gave us details. She planned the whole thing. She'd done it before. Used charm, fake names, false love stories. But you were different. Mr. Matthews. She stayed longer this time. And your son? She was scared of him. David smiled faintly. She should have been. That night, Ethan slept soundly for the first time in weeks, and for the first time in his life. David locked every door in the house, not because he was scared, but because he knew exactly who he was protecting. The next morning, David was up early. He stood at the kitchen counter, pouring himself a cup of coffee, but didn't take a sip. He just stared out the window into the backyard, where the wind moved gently through the trees. The news about Martin being caught had brought some relief, but not peace. Elise, or whatever her real name was still out there. somewhere. And even though the police believed she was on the run, the thought that she might come back was always in the back of David's mind. In the living room, Ethan sat cross-legged on the carpet, flipping through a book. He wasn't really reading. His thoughts kept drifting. They had caught the man who was part of the plan, the one from the pictures, the one Elise had called M. That felt like winning half the battle. But it was the other half, the woman, who had smiled so sweetly at him while secretly calling him a problem, that still haunted Ethan at night. That afternoon, they got a visit from Officer Grant again. He brought news. And this time, he didn't come alone. A woman from Child Services was with him, a kind, soft-spoken lady named Ms. Harper. Ethan sat at the kitchen table while the adults spoke. He watched them carefully, but didn't interrupt. Eventually, Ms. Harper turned to him with a gentle smile. "Hi, Ethan," she said kindly. "I just want to ask you a few questions. Nothing scary. I heard you were very brave." Ethan nodded slowly. She asked how long he had noticed Elise acting differently, if she had ever touched him or made him feel unsafe. Ethan answered honestly. No, she hadn't hit him. But her words had felt like tiny cuts that never healed. The way she looked at him. The way she made him feel small when no one else was watching. "She told me I was just part of the package," he said softly. "Like I was something my dad had to deal with." David's heart broke hearing that again. He had heard it before, but not like this. Not with Ethan's eyes lowered and his voice steady, like he had already accepted it as truth. After Miss Harper finished, Officer Grant spoke. "Martin's been talking," he said. "A lot, actually. Once he was in custody, he gave up almost everything. Names, locations, details about their past jobs, but the most important thing, he confirmed the whole plan." David leaned forward. "The plan to—" "Yes, the—" Officer nodded grimly. "After the wedding, they were planning to stage a tragic accident during your honeymoon. Drowning, rock climbing incident, something that would pay out big, especially under the double indemnity clause in that policy she had you sign." David stared at the table. The edges of his coffee mug blurred as his eyes filled with moisture. "She was never going to build a life with me," he whispered. "She was planning my funeral." The officer continued. "Martin claims Elise had done this before. 2 other men, both wealthy, both fell in love fast, both left broken. But she had never taken it this far. You were different. And she would have succeeded, if not for Ethan." David looked at his son. Ethan was holding a glass of juice, but his hands were shaking just a little. Ms. Harper smiled at him again. "You're very special, Ethan. Not many people, especially not kids, would have the courage to do what you did." Ethan didn't smile. But he nodded. Then came the part none of them expected. "Late last night," Officer Grant said, "Elise tried to contact someone from her old circle. She was desperate, hungry, broke. She needed help getting out of state. That person didn't help her. Instead, they gave us the tip." David sat up straight. "Did you find her?" "We found where she was," the officer replied. "A motel 3 towns over. But by the time we got there, she was gone. She left behind her things, though. Clothes, a notebook, and a message." He reached into his folder and handed David a small, handwritten note. The paper was torn at the edges, the ink shaky. David read it silently, his jaw clenched. Then, he passed it to Ethan. The note read, "I never meant for it to go this far. I was going to walk away after the wedding, take my cut and disappear. But the kid, he saw everything. I couldn't outsmart him, tell him. He was the only one who ever made me feel guilty." Ethan's hands trembled. "She wrote that?" he whispered. "Yes," Officer Grant replied. "She's still out there, but she's not hiding with confidence anymore. She's scared. She knows the world is looking for her, and she knows she's not in control now. David nodded slowly. What happens next? We keep looking. We've flagged her passport. All airports, train stations, and bus terminals are on alert. But even if we don't catch her tomorrow, she's running forever. That's her new life now. The officer stood to leave. But before he did, he looked at Ethan. You gave your dad a future, he said. Most adults wouldn't have had your strength. Ethan looked up, quiet for a moment. Then he asked, Do you think she'll come back? The officer looked him in the eye. Not if she's smart, and she is smart, but you're smarter. That night, David let Ethan sleep in his bed again. They lay there, the lamp off, the room quiet except for the sound of the wind against the windows. After a while, Ethan whispered, She didn't win, did she? David turned his head. No, he said gently. She lost everything. Ethan nodded once, then closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he dreamed of something better. Not of running, not of being scared, but of standing tall and being believed. 1 year later, the church where everything happened had new flowers outside. A different couple stood on the steps, posing for their wedding photos, smiling wide. They had no idea what had happened there a year before. But Ethan remembered, and so did his father. On that same day, while another bride walked down the same aisle, David and Ethan were an hour away, hiking through tall green hills in a quiet state park. Just the two of them. No cameras, no cake, no drama. It had become their new tradition. Instead of mourning a wedding that never happened, they celebrated the day Ethan had spoken up and saved his father's life. They walked side by side, backpacks on, boots crunching against dirt and leaves. Ethan was taller now. His voice had changed just a little, but the fire in him, the quiet strength, was still there. As they reached the top of the hill, they found their favorite spot, a wide flat rock overlooking a glassy blue lake. David sat, first, letting out a small laugh as he caught his breath. Still can't keep up with you, he joked. Ethan grinned and flopped down beside him. You're not that old, David chuckled. Try hiking with bad knees. They pulled out sandwiches, juice and trail mix. They didn't talk much while eating. They didn't have to. Silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just part of being together. After a while, David pulled something out of his bag. A small notebook, black cover, worn at the edges. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's that? David held it up. Remember the notebook Elise left in that motel? Ethan's expression darkened a little. Yeah, I kept it, David said. Not to punish myself, but because I wanted to understand how I let her in, how I missed the signs, how I nearly... He trailed off. Ethan waited. David continued. I read it, every page. She wrote about a lot of things. But do you know what name showed up the most? Ethan shook his head. Yours, David said. Over and over. You annoyed her, confused her, scared her. Not because you were a problem, but because you were the only one she couldn't fool. She called you too sharp for his age. Ethan blinked. David smiled softly. That's not something to carry as a burden, son. That's something to be proud of. Ethan looked down, his fingers picking at the zipper on his jacket. Do you think she ever really cared about you? Even a little? David didn't answer right away. He watched the wind ripple across the water. I think she cared about the idea of what I could give her. Safety, money, a clean name. But love? No. Love doesn't lie like that. Ethan nodded. I'm glad she's gone. David looked at him carefully. You still have bad dreams? Sometimes, Ethan admitted. But not like before. Do you still feel afraid she might come back? Ethan thought about it. then shook his head. No, not really. I know we're safe now, but I guess part of me is always waiting, like something else might go wrong. David reached over and rested a hand on his son's shoulder. That's what trauma does. It doesn't knock once and leave. It lingers, hides, shows up on quiet nights when you least expect it. But we fight it by remembering what's real, what's solid. He tapped his chest. You. Me. Right here. That's solid. Ethan smiled faintly. You sound like a counselor. David laughed. Maybe I've been in enough therapy to qualify. They sat a while longer, watching the sky change colors. Later, they walked down to the water, skipping stones across the surface. Ethan threw one that skipped 6 times. David managed. 3. I'm still better, Ethan said, teasing. David nudged him. Only because you have a younger arm. As the sun started dipping low, casting gold across the hills, David turned to his son. Can I tell you something? Ethan nodded. There was a time after your mom died when I felt empty, like I was just surviving. Then I met Elise, and for a while, I felt like I had found color again. I didn't realize the color was fake. Ethan stayed quiet. David continued. But this past year, just you and me, hiking, cooking weird meals, talking about school, that color came back. For real this time. He paused. You gave me back something she never could. A reason to be fully present. A reason to be a better man. Ethan looked up, eyes stinging just a little. I'm glad I spoke up. David pulled him into a hug. Me too. They packed up and started heading back to the car. On the drive home, they passed a roadside wedding venue. Lights strung from tree to tree. A small band played softly. People were dancing. Ethan looked at it and asked, Do you think you'll ever try again? With someone new? David smiled gently. Maybe, one day. But if I do, I promise, no secrets, no blind spots, and she'll have to pass the Ethan test. Ethan laughed. I'll make it tough. David nodded. Good. That night, after pizza and a movie at home, David walked past Ethan's room to find him asleep. Blanket kicked off, mouth slightly open, book still resting on his chest. He paused, looked at his son, and whispered, You're my greatest story. Then, turned off the light. And for the first time in a very long time, there were no shadows in the hallway, only peace.